I'm so excited to welcome to the stage Xiye Bastida. We are going to have a great conversation about her work as an activist. So good to see you. You brought props.
I did bring props, but you cannot see them yet.
Thank you so much for coming. I am fangirling a little bit. I've edited so many stories about you, and I'm just so impressed with the work that you're doing. So I thought we could start kind of at the beginning. You started doing climate activism work when you were 15. When I was 15, I think I was thinking about boys and like getting my driver's license. So I'm very curious what got you into this space, and what did getting into the space mean to you at the very beginning?
So I love this question, firstly, because I like to start by saying I did not start my climate work. It was my parents, it was my community, it was my roots. My parents met at the first ever climate conference in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 when they were in their 20s. So when they were my age, my parents were already doing climate work, which is even more impressive than youth activists today, because we see the climate crisis in our daily lives. And, you know, my community, I come from an indigenous community in central Mexico called Otomi Toltec, and we have a lot of values around respect for nature, reciprocity, reverence, intergenerational collaboration, and seeing nature as an extension of us and us as an extension of nature. I always love sharing this detail about my language, which is that the word for skin is the same as the word for the outer layer of the earth. So embedded in our culture is the notion that we are extensions of the earth, and we have not been behaving in that way. You know, imagine a world where Category 5 hurricanes grow in over 2 days. Imagine a world where we are at 1.64 degrees of warming for 12 consecutive months, where our unifying story is a flood or a hurricane or a wildfire, and where over 1 billion animals can die in one single wildfire. And now imagine that there are children that have known nothing but that world. And I am one of those children, one of those youth today. For many people in the climate space that have been in the climate space for decades, they know that, you know, they knew how bad it was going to get, but we, as youth climate activists, know nothing else. My community flooded when I was just 13 years old, and I think that it's incredibly important to share that story, because it was not my parents talking about climate that got me to act. It was the fact that it happened to me. And I don't want it to happen to people for them to act. We don't want people to experience the climate crisis to act. So I think that is some of the context of why my generation was rising up, and millions of youth were in the streets in 2019, 7.4 million across the world, and many of you might have gone to that march. Many of you might know people who organized it. And the truth is that everybody in this room, we know what the stakes are, but it still hasn't become, you know, the topic of interest of everybody around the world. And we're still using, each year, 1.75 Earths, meaning we're using Earth's capacity to regenerate 1.75 times faster. When my mom was growing up, the Earth Overshoot Day was in December. Now it's August 1st. That is a very long way of saying that we are here, my generation is here today, because we have no other choice. And we really want to make sure that when we talk about activism, which is a very mystified term, what does it mean to be an activist? What does it mean to speak up? I think it means to be creative. Because creativity is looking at something and seeing how it can be more beautiful, how it can work better, how it can be more effective, or in this case, how can we work towards balance with Mother Earth? Many of you might have heard that we have passed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. Who saw those news? And what does that mean? It means that there is a safe operating zone that we have passed in temperature, in pathogens, in nitrogen, and other like chemical concentrations that I frankly don't understand. And I think that's another one of the issues. We expect everybody to understand everything. But today we are in a case where many people from my generation are either totally ignoring the climate crisis and focusing on daily trends, overconsumption, or so embedded in it that we cannot think of anything else. And I think the path forward is some of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing today, which is about how do we work together intergenerationally so that we are not saying things like adults stole our future. We're saying we have a problem now. How can we fix it together?
Yeah. It's a perfect segue. I want to ask you about the role of youth activism. And we wrote a story last year that you graciously participated in about, we called it sort of Greta Thunberg's climate cohort, people who sort of started in their teens 6, 7 years ago and have grown up in this movement. And this tension between the way that adults, older people sort of look to the next generation and say, you've got it, you'll handle it. It's so great that the youth activists are getting involved, but then also kind of absolve themselves of responsibility and say, like, oh, the next generation's going to handle it. I think I'm curious, sort of a twofold question. Why is it so important to have youth activists in this space? But also, do you feel like sometimes there's like a little bit of lip service being paid to, like, not actually listening to the things that you guys are saying?
I mean, it's easy to not listen to the things that we're saying because the things that we're saying entail changing full systems, and we are comfortable in the systems that we have created. And when you have a perspective that is trying to tell you, let's stop, let's change, I understand how difficult that can be because I can feel it, you know, in my own nonprofit when somebody else has an idea. You think of everything that needs to happen for it to become a reality. And so I understand why it can feel that youth activists can be naive at times at saying, we need to be net zero by this date. We need to this, and this. And there's this concept that we don't understand the real world, whatever that means, which I think, you know, it's everybody's own perception. But I think that the naiveness is looking at the level of our crisis and thinking that we can't go on any longer. That is truly what our problem is. And so when we talk about youth activism in spaces of influence, for example, the Secretary General has advisors, that they're youth advisors that are helping him see the world the way that youth activists see it. And you might see some of the headlines of the Secretary General saying, we are on a highway to hell, which is, I don't like that messaging or that language, but it is because he's seeing the world through our eyes. And then we see other companies, you know, embedding youth as advisors, etc. But having one call a month is not enough to truly include the views of youth. A few months ago, I was in this conversation where we had CEOs of companies and youth activists together, youth climate activists, and one of them said, I had never thought of talking with a youth activist because I would think they would just scream at me or something. And I think that's another perception of activism. It's confrontational and it makes you uncomfortable. And my question for the leaders out there, not only the corporate leaders, but, you know, also government leaders is it not necessary to be uncomfortable, to change our minds, to see the problems, to be empathetic to the way that youth are feeling across the world? And that's why I think that every single company, no matter who you are, needs to have youth advisors, and not just one or two, because it's harder to stand up when you're just yourself. We need to have true cohorts, true inclusion, true implementation, because at the end of the day, we want youth to be able to shape the world because we want to live in it. We want our kids to live in it. We want it to be healthy and safe. So that is what we really are here for. And we know that that requires changing a lot of the relationships that have been built across our modern world, like sometimes adults have only contact with youth when it's internships or fellowships. We don't have intergenerational circles, like sitting around a fire telling stories, which is part of the way that indigenous communities pass down storytelling and knowledge. So how can we even tap into indigenous systems of thinking and being to improve and change the world that we have today?
How would you say, I mean, you've now been doing this quite a while, how would you say your tactics or style or approach has evolved since you started to now, if it has?
Activism has evolved over decades, and it's, you know, I think one of the biggest issues that we had as climate activists was to think that we were making up all of these new tactics of activism, whether that be blocking a street or social media blast or all of these other things. And what I've come to learn is how important it is to look at past stories of activism, because they have shown us what works, what persistence works, what type of organized citizen action does. And something that I can't believe I would say this now, because I wouldn't think this 4 or 5 years ago, which also our mindset changes, is sometimes for chief sustainability officers, they need activists. They need activists because if we don't push the public narrative and the pressure to something that is outside of what you think is possible, you will not be able to do what actually is possible. So activists are here to help everybody push the boundaries of our imagination, so that whatever you want to implement and change in your company it becomes a reality. And as I grow older, and all of us grow older, everything becomes more nuanced. And I was having a conversation with somebody earlier saying that sometimes we lose our power. We feel like we lose our power when we understand the world better. And that's why it's so important to go always back to a place where we feel clarity. And for me, that place is nature. Because when I go back to my territory, to my hometown, to my land, again, I get this feeling of what really is the work that we need to do, which is that deep work of transformation. So that's what I would say. Go to the place where you find clarity and ask yourself, what am I shaping this world to be? How am I being a good architect of the future? And then I would just like to add that I think activism, and I think all of us should be activists, or whatever word you choose, has 3 things, 3 aspects. Each of us, I think, should be involved in deep community work first, which in my case, now I'm moving to Mexico City. I graduated from university in the US, I'm moving back to Mexico. In my case, deep community work is going to be working with the Chinampas and the Ajolotes, which is this, working with the Chinampas and the Ajolotes, which is this ancient system in southern Mexico City that was built by indigenous communities prior. And it's one of the systems that can generate the most food possible for Mexico City. So deep community work for me looks like helping the Ajolotes, which is, if you watched How to Train Your Dragon, that's what an ajolote looks like without the wings. The second type of work we should be involved in is intersectional work. Because we're all in silos, we're in echo chambers, we need to reach out. One way you can look at it is, in everything that I do, I should hold the hand of somebody younger and hold the hand of somebody older. Because mentorship goes all ways, and we need to be able to think through this together. Another way of looking at it is, go to the places that do make you uncomfortable. If you're not in climate and you're here, thank you. If you're in climate and you're here, also thank you. Sorry. And for me, intersectional, does it work? Yeah. For me, intersectional work has also been going to the UN climate conferences. I've been to the past 4 COPs, which, my first UN conference, I was 15, which, that's crazy. But the language of negotiation is so incredibly difficult. Anybody knows what NCQG means? No, and that's climate finance, the biggest thing that we're going to have to worry about in the next 50 years. How the global north finances the global south for energy transition, for emissions reductions, for loss and damage after climate disasters. The NCQG stands for the New Collective Quantified Goal. And they choose those words because they don't want us to know what's going on. So our job as activists is to be translators as well. Translators of the work that happens on the streets, of how we feel as youth, how we feel in our communities, with these entities that have so many barriers of entry that you need to read hundreds of documents to understand what the Paris Agreement is, what the Loss and Damage Fund is, what the NCQG is. And all it is how do we actually stay below 1.5 degrees of warming and make sure that the global south gets the support that it needs, and the frontline communities in the global north. And then the last thing that we all need to include in our activism work is narrative work. And you just heard a beautiful storytelling session. And narrative storytelling is so critical because the stories that we have been told of the world are the stories where more is better and better is bigger. And that's everything that we have been taught to know, like more highways, more buildings. And in indigenous communities, there's the concept of good living, of good enough, of not better but good. And so we have to question ourselves, how do we tell stories of good? What is good? When do we need no more? And how can the economic system adapt to no more? How can we see value in nature? Why is nature more valuable when it's dead than when it's alive? All of these questions we have to think through, because they might be uncomfortable, they might mess up the economic systems in the ways that we know it, but the earth cannot handle it anymore. So we need to come together to see that life is taking care of life is our responsibility. We should not live from the earth, we should live with the earth.
I want to give you a chance to talk about your documentary, but I want to ask one more question in this vein because, we're all here at a conference together. I would like to believe that everyone in this room cares about climate change and is focused on it in some capacity, but I'll just speak for myself here. I will take my flight home. I will put my lanyard down. I will sit on my couch. All I'm going to want to do is watch Love Island and think about nothing. I'm just going to want to space out. And so even when you care, even when you're invested in the cause, it's so easy to compartmentalize.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, having been to so many conferences, having done so much of this, what would you say to people that they should be taking away from this? That probably isn't like go home, watch Love Island. Like, what is the thing that they should be taking out of this space?
So you took my little spiel out of my brain, because I was going to show everybody the conferences that I've been to.
My gosh.
This is like 3 months or 4 months, I think. You might recognize some of these badges. They're from different years, like this one, the Aspen Ideas. And, I like some of them that are wooden. Maybe we should think of that for all of them. That's not the point. The point is, why are we collecting badges as medals? Going to conference from conference. And that is not to say that being here is incredible, because now we have a shared badge. And all of us have this common experience now. And we're drawing this line of connections, and this in person is where we meet each other and when we can tell to each other how much we care and what we're doing for the world. But the question is, when we go back home and we sit down and we look at our schedule, what do we do? And I think, and this is a question I ask myself almost every week, right? Like, what am I doing now? How can I reprioritize the things that I'm doing to have impact, to lower the barriers of entry, and to take care of ourselves? Because that is something that a lot of us in the climate space don't do. We're not taking enough care of ourselves. And I need you to take care of yourselves, because we need the movement to be resilient. And we need to tell that to everybody in this movement, even if you're joining also. And really the message behind, posing that question of what do we do when we go home and sit down is that everything needs to change. So everybody should have this big question on a blank sheet. What do I do in order to help Mother Earth, in order to help my community, and in order to help the future? And you might have 2, 3 things. You might have the things that we have been told work for 50 years. But what we really need is that type of innovation, that type of new storytelling, of new narrative, so that we go from thinking what world we're leaving to future generations to what generations we are leaving to the world. Who are we behaving as humanity? What are we doing on this planet? And it turns very philosophical very quickly, but I do think that is what we have been missing, a connection to life, a connection to nature, a connection to our climate stories even. Because many people, when you ask them what your climate story is, it is a story of sadness. And I think our climate stories should be stories of reconnection. There should be stories of when we fell in love with nature again, when we decided that we were going to be protectors, we were going to be defenders. And the last thing is, ask yourself what your superpower is. What is the thing that makes you stand out in a room? What is the thing that makes you stand out in your community? What is that thing like kindness or humility that is going to change the world? Because I do think that what we're missing the most is those type of ways of being. And I think I'm asking also from the bottom of my heart that you truly put yourself in the feet of young people and ask, in 2100, I'm going to have grandkids. I'm going to love somebody who is alive in the year 2100. And all of our climate models go up till 2100. And they're not looking very good right now. So how do we make sure that in that future that we're envisioning, it is a thriving, regenerative future? And all of us are here because we want to shape that world. And so in the next few sessions, in the next day, today and tomorrow, you're going to be seeing all of these different types of ideas of people who are trying, of people who are breaking boundaries, of people who are remembering. Because remember also that it's not just about looking forward, but looking back, about how Earth has developed systems, because Earth is very wise. And we would do very good to follow the systems of the Earth that have created all of the fastest carbon capture ever, the fastest oxygen generation systems ever. So that is really the way that we need to look at the world. And I thank you all for being here and being part of that story. The new story of what humanity did to make sure that we leave the Earth better than we found it.
So we are at time, but in our last 10 seconds that I just allocated us, when will people and where will they be able to see The Way of the Whale, which is your documentary, or a documentary that you have been a part of?
Yes, and I will keep this one short, I promise. There's a film called The Way of the Whale that I'm working on, and it will be premiering in September in Climate Week. So if you'll be in Climate Week, please get in touch with me. I would love to have you there. It's a story about following the gray whale from the Arctic Ocean, from Mexico to the Arctic Ocean, seeing all the challenges that the whale has to go through, but it's also a story about collaboration, interconnectedness, and what it looks like to learn from past environmental wins to have new ones over and over again. So you're invited to the screening of The Way of the Whale, and you'll see it on streaming next year.
Great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yes. Xiye.
So good. You're so good.